Welcome to the channel, my alien friends. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Enjoy listening. The sprawling city of Neo-Tokyo pulsed beneath a sky that never slept. Endless streams of neon signs flickered above the dense alleys, their garish hues bleeding into the air, mingling with the sharp stench of exhaust from the hovercraft that zoomed overhead. The planet had become a haven for all forms of galactic commerce, both legal and illicit, its dark corners hiding everything from alien smuggling rings to black market cybernetic surgeries. In the streets below, humanity and alien species alike shuffled through the crowded, rain-slicked streets, most too preoccupied with their own problems to notice the towering figure that moved among them. Ethan Core, once the most feared soldier in the galaxy, had become just another face in the throng. His once commanding presence, honed by years of military service and countless battles, now obscured by a simple jacket pulled tight around his broad frame. His brown eyes, alert and calculating, scanned the crowds out of habit, his hand twitching at his side, instinctively searching for a weapon that was no longer there. It had been 5 years since Ethan left the Galactic Defense Force. 5 years of trying to bury the memories that haunted him. Yet no matter how far he traveled or how deeply immersed himself in the chaos of Earth's alien-laden streets, the nightmares followed. The cries of the enslaved, the countless faces of the innocent caught in the crossfire of war, and, most of all, the memory of his mother's desperate screams as she was ripped away from him, haunted his every moment. The scent of synthetic meat sizzling on an open grill broke through his reverie. Ethan paused at a street vendor's stall, ordering a bowl of noodles more out of routine than hunger. As he waited, his eyes flickered across the bustling marketplace. Hover carts laden with exotic wares zipped by, and neon holographic signs beckoned passersby to buy everything from alien fruits to black market weaponry. He had hoped to disappear here, amidst the chaos, to live out his remaining years in anonymity. But peace was a luxury he had never known, and today, once again, fate had other plans. A flicker of movement in the corner of his eye caught his attention. A hooded figure, moving swiftly and with purpose, darting through the throngs of people. Ethan's instincts, honed from years of surviving dangerous missions, kicked in immediately. Something about the figure's movements screamed danger. They were running from something or someone. He couldn't stop himself from following. His footsteps were silent, his bulk gliding effortlessly through the crowd as he tracked the figure. They moved deeper into the city's labyrinthine alleys, away from the noise and light, where the neon's glow grew dim and the shadows thickened. Ethan's heart began to pound, though his face remained stoic. His eyes narrowed as he passed flickering holographic signs advertising weapons, illegal substances, and even people. He knew this place. The black market. The figure he followed vanished around a corner, and when Ethan turned after them, the alley opened into a small, dimly lit courtyard surrounded by decaying buildings. The air here felt heavy, laced with a tension that spoke of deals made in darkness and violence that lurked just beneath the surface. At the center of the courtyard, a crowd had gathered around a makeshift stage. Raised voices and jeers echoed off the surrounding walls. Ethan's blood ran cold. He had been to markets like this before, during the war, where the trade wasn't in goods but in lives. He pushed his way forward, his size and the look in his eyes parting the crowd without much resistance. As he reached the front, he saw her, a woman, alien, with skin the color of deep sapphire, stood shackled on the stage. Her arms were bound by glowing energy cuffs that sent flickers of light reflecting off her skin. She stood with her head bowed, shoulders slumped, barely clothed in tattered rags that hid little of her striking beauty. Her body was covered in faint scars, reminders of her captivity. But it was her eyes, large and luminous even in defeat, that froze Ethan where he stood. Pain. Suffering. A total lack of hope. It was a look Ethan had seen before in the faces of slaves and prisoners across countless worlds, and it ripped through him like a blade. But there was something else, a flicker of defiance deep beneath the misery. She was not entirely broken. The auctioneer, a slimy-looking alien with tentacles twitching in excitement, shouted to the crowd, "A rare specimen from the Zirian system. Gentlemen, feast your eyes on this exotic beauty. Bidding starts at 50,000 credits." The crowd surged with bids, voices clamoring over one another. Ethan's jaw clenched as he watched the woman's head lower even further, her shoulders curling inward as though she wanted to disappear. The alien trader raised his voice again, spurring the crowd further into a frenzy as credits soared higher and higher. As the numbers rose, so did Ethan's rage. Memories flashed through his mind. His mother, the screams, the slavers ripping her away as a boy stood helpless. That had been the day his world ended. The moment he learned that the galaxy was a brutal, uncaring place where lives were bartered like goods. But not today. Not her. His body moved before his mind could catch up. 500,000 credits. Ethan's voice cut through the noise like a blade, the crowd immediately falling into a stunned silence. The auctioneer's eyes widened in recognition, his excitement replaced with thinly veiled fear. The name Ethan Core was still known, even in places like this. Well, the famous Ethan Core, the auctioneer purred, his tentacles writhing. What a surprise to have a legend in our midst. I assume you're here to purchase this lovely Zirian? Her freedom, Ethan growled. I'm buying her freedom. The crowd murmured uneasily as the tension thickened. The auctioneer's eyes darted nervously, sensing trouble. A generous offer, he stammered. 500,000 credits it is. Sold. The woman's head snapped up at that, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ethan's face softened just for a moment as he approached the stage, handing over a credit chip without a second thought. He stepped in front of her, meeting her gaze as he reached out to deactivate her energy cuffs. She flinched, clearly unused to such gestures, but something in her eyes flickered again. What's your name? Ethan asked quietly. She hesitated, her voice hoarse from disuse. Lyra. Lyra, you're free now. She stared at him, disbelief warring with a desperate, fragile hope. Before Ethan could say more, a commotion broke out behind him. He turned sharply to see a group of thugs pushing their way through the crowd, led by a scarred alien with cybernetic enhancements. The leader's voice boomed across the courtyard. That slave belongs to us, Core. We have an arrangement with the market. No last-minute buyers. Ethan's body tensed, instinctively stepping in front of Lyra as the thugs advanced. His mind raced, evaluating his options, but one thing was clear. There would be no running. Not now. He glanced back at Lyra, who stood frozen in fear. When I say run, Ethan murmured, his voice low and calm, you run. Don't look back. Lyra nodded, eyes wide. As the first thug swung at him, Ethan's body reacted like the soldier he once was, muscle memory taking over as he exploded into motion. With a sickening crunch, his fist connected with the thug's jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground. The fight erupted in a blur of violence, Ethan moving through the group with brutal efficiency. But there were too many, and Ethan knew they couldn't hold out long. Run! He shouted over the chaos. Lyra hesitated for a second, then bolted into the crowd, vanishing into the maze of alleys beyond. Ethan allowed himself a moment of relief before focusing back on the fight, his fists flying as he dispatched another attacker. As he fought, a voice cut through the melee. Enough games, Core. The leader pulled out a sleek energy pistol, leveling it at Ethan's chest. Time seemed to slow as the weapon hummed to life, its deadly glow illuminating the alley. But before the thug could fire, a blur of blue shot past Ethan's vision. Lyra, moving with unexpected grace, grabbed the thug's arm, twisting it away just as the energy bolt fired, scorching the air inches from Ethan's face. With a quick, fluid motion, Lyra disarmed the thug, sending the weapon clattering to the ground. For a moment there was silence, the alley frozen in disbelief. Then chaos resumed as Ethan took down the remaining attackers. Blood pounding in his ears, he grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her with him as they sprinted through the streets. Together, they disappeared into the neon shadows of Neo-Tokyo. The air in the dimly lit chamber felt thick and oppressive, almost as if it weighed down on the crowd gathered within. Ethan's steps echoed across the stone floor as he entered, his senses sharp, his body tense. Around him, the dark recesses of the auction hall teemed with life, though none of it was the kind that belonged under the light of day. Aliens and humans alike whispered and jostled for position, their eyes fixed on the raised platform at the center, where the night's auction was about to begin. This was no ordinary market. It was a place where lives were bought and sold, where hope and humanity withered beneath the weight of greed. Ethan had seen enough of these places during the war to know that what was about to happen here would stain his soul if he allowed it. The scent of sweat, alcohol, and desperation clung to the air. Holographic screens displayed the faces and statistics of the captives that would soon be sold. Zirian males, Orican females, human children. Their lives reduced to a list of attributes and a price tag. Ethan's stomach churned, but he kept his expression cold, unflinching. He couldn't afford to betray his disgust here. Not yet. As the lights dimmed, a single spotlight illuminated the stage. The murmuring crowd quieted, anticipation hanging thick in the room. Ethan pushed his way through the bodies, positioning himself at the edge of the throng. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his breathing steady, forcing his mind to focus. The auctioneer, a slithering, pale-skinned creature with elongated limbs and a face like a withered skull, slunk onto the stage. His voice oozed false charm as he addressed the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished patrons of the galaxy's finest market, welcome to tonight's main event. He crooned, his voice slimy with satisfaction. Tonight, we offer you something truly special, a specimen unlike any other. The crowd leaned forward, hungry, eager. Ethan's jaw tightened. From the shadows, the guards dragged her into the light. Lyra. The sight of her sent a shock through Ethan's chest. She was barely recognizable from the woman he had encountered on the streets of Neo-Tokyo. Her deep blue skin was bruised, the vibrant hue marred by new scars that crisscrossed her exposed limbs. Energy cuffs bound her wrists and ankles, glowing ominously as they restricted any movement beyond a shuffling walk. Her gaze was hollow, as if she had given up fighting long ago, yet there was still a faint flicker of life in her eyes, one that ignited something deep within Ethan. Behold! The auctioneer gestured theatrically toward Lyra, as if she were nothing more than a prized object. A Xerian female, rare and untouched by human hands. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Strong, resilient, a perfect addition to any collection or labor force. The crowd erupted into murmurs of interest. Ethan felt his blood boil as eyes gleamed with dark desires, calculating how much her pain was worth. His fists clenched at his sides as he struggled to maintain his calm. He had seen the worst of war, the ugliest corners of the galaxy, but nothing made him feel more repulsed than the trade in living, breathing beings. Bidding starts at 50,000 credits, the auctioneer announced with glee. Who will be the first to claim this fine creature? Voices called out, numbers thrown around like careless confetti. 75,000. 100,000. The price soared higher and higher, as though Lyra's life was nothing more than a commodity. Ethan's mind raced, his every instinct screaming at him to stop the madness, but there was nothing he could do yet. Then he saw it. A moment, a fleeting glance. Her eyes found his. It was just for a second. But in that brief connection, Ethan saw more than fear. He saw a silent plea, not for rescue, but for something far more tragic. Release. It was as if she no longer believed in the possibility of escape, only in the mercy of an end to her suffering. Something broke inside him. 500,000 credits! Ethan's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, sharp and unrelenting. The room fell silent. Every head turned toward him. The auctioneer's smile faltered, his eyes widening in recognition as he looked at Ethan. Ah, a very generous bid indeed, he stammered, trying to regain his composure. But surely you understand the stakes. This is a legal transaction. I know what this is, Ethan growled. And I know slavery when I see it. You'll accept my bid, or I'll make sure every peacekeeper from here to the Outer Rim knows about this little operation. The crowd murmured nervously, sensing the tension. The auctioneer's face twisted into a nervous grin. Very well, sold for 500,000 credits. The transaction was made in a flash. Ethan climbed the stage, his heart thundering in his chest as he reached Lyra. She stared at him, her expression unreadable, but he could see the disbelief in her eyes. He didn't wait for her to speak as he deactivated the energy cuffs and held out his hand. You're free, he said softly. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. For a second, just a flicker of time, Ethan thought they might actually make it out of here in peace. But the universe had never been that kind. Not to him, not to her. Hold it right there. A guttural voice bellowed from behind, cutting through the stillness. Ethan's blood ran cold as he turned to see a gang of armed thugs pushing through the crowd. Their leader, a hulking alien with scars marking his leathery skin, sneered as his crew surrounded the stage. That piece of merchandise belongs to us, the alien growled, and we're not leaving without her. The fight wasn't over, it had only just begun. The engines of the Phantom Star roared to life as the ship tore through the dense atmosphere of Neo-Tokyo, breaking free of the planet's gravity. Ethan's grip on the controls was tight, his knuckles white as he maneuvered the vessel through the crowded skies. Below, the sprawling city shrank into a blur of lights and smog, its neon glow fading as they ascended toward the cold darkness of space. Beside him in the co-pilot's seat, Lyra sat rigid, her eyes wide and unblinking as she stared at the stars for the first time in years. Her deep blue skin, still marred by the fresh bruises of captivity, glistened in the dim light of the cockpit. There was something about the vastness of space, the freedom it promised, that seemed to paralyze her. First time off-world? Ethan asked, his voice quieter than usual, though his focus remained on the controls. Lyra nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I never thought I'd see it. I never thought I'd be free. Ethan glanced at her, seeing the mix of awe and fear etched into her features. He wanted to reassure her, but there was no time for comfort now. Their escape from the black market had been reckless, the kind of daring that didn't go unpunished. He knew that the slavers wouldn't let them slip away so easily. As if on cue, an alarm blared on the console, its shrill sound piercing the tense silence. Ethan's eyes flicked to the rear sensors. A trio of ships had appeared on the screen, closing in fast, sleek, predatory vessels, built for speed and equipped with enough firepower to obliterate them if they didn't escape soon. "Damn it," Ethan muttered under his breath. "They've found us." Lyra stiffened beside him, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. "What do we do?" "We run," Ethan said, his voice hardening as his fingers danced over the controls. The Phantom Star lurched forward, its engines humming with a low, powerful growl as it surged into the vast expanse of space. Stars blurred into streaks of light as the ship pushed to its limits, but the enemy vessels were faster than Ethan had anticipated. They gained on them with every second, their glowing weapon systems primed to strike. For a moment, doubt crept into his mind. He had been in worse situations during the war, but then he had backup, squadrons, fleets, allies. Now it was just him and Lyra. A broken slave, and a man who had long since given up the fight. Ethan shook the thought from his head. He couldn't afford doubt. Not now. Not when their lives hung in the balance. The first blast of enemy fire rocked the ship violently, sending a shudder through its hull. Warning lights flashed across the dashboard, and the shields flared to life, absorbing the brunt of the attack, but weakening with every hit. "We can't keep this up," Lyra said, her voice tight with fear. Her gaze darted to the weapons console, though she clearly had no idea how to operate it. "I know," Ethan replied, his mind racing. His options were running out. The Phantom Star was a reliable ship, sturdy and agile, but it wasn't built for dogfights, and right now, they were outnumbered and outgunned. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, pushing the engines even harder. Another blast shook the ship, and this time, it was close. Too close. The shields were faltering, and if they took another hit like that, it would be over. Then an idea flashed in his mind. Reckless, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But it was their only shot. He glanced at Lyra. "I need you to trust me." She stared at him, fear in her eyes, but also something else, a flicker of belief. A belief that maybe, just maybe, this man could pull off a miracle. She nodded. Without another word, Ethan yanked the controls, pulling the ship into a sharp dive. They hurtled downward, spinning in a dizzying spiral toward a massive asteroid field that stretched out like a graveyard of stone and debris. Lyra gasped, her hands clutching the armrests as the ship weaved through the deadly terrain. "What are you doing?" she cried, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. "Even they won't follow us in here," Ethan said through gritted teeth, his focus locked on the jagged rocks that loomed ahead. The asteroid field was treacherous, filled with shifting boulders and space debris that could tear the ship apart if they weren't careful. Behind them, the pursuing ships hesitated for a moment, but only a moment. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, they followed, determined to finish what they had started. Ethan's hands flew across the controls as he navigated the ship through the chaos of the asteroid field, narrowly avoiding collision after collision. His heart pounded in his chest, every instinct screaming that this was a fool's gamble, but he had no other choice. The enemy ships were closing in fast, their weapon systems locked onto the Phantom Star. Another blast sizzled past, scorching the side of the ship and sending a spray of sparks through the cockpit. Lyra cried out, her body tensing as the ship rocked violently. "Almost there," Ethan muttered, eyes scanning the field for a way out. The asteroids shifted unpredictably, but up ahead, he saw it. An opening, a gap in the debris large enough for the Phantom Star to slip through. If he timed it right. He fired the thrusters, the ship surging forward in a final, desperate dash. The enemy ships fired one last barrage, but the asteroids blocked most of the blasts. The Phantom Star shot through the gap, the sharp hiss of the hyperdrive powering up filling the cockpit. Ethan's hands flew across the controls, inputting the coordinates for a hyperspace jump, just as another explosion rocked the asteroid field behind them. He gripped the controls tightly, his breath catching in his throat. Then, with a sudden lurch, they were free. The stars elongated into streaks of light and the ship vanished into hyperspace. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the engines and the soft beeping of the navigation system. Lyra finally exhaled, a shaky breath escaping her as she slumped back in her seat. "I can't believe we made it." Ethan glanced at her, a small, weary smile tugging at his lips. "Believe it? But this isn't over yet." Lyra met his gaze, her eyes still wide with the adrenaline of the chase. "What now?" Ethan leaned back in his seat, his eyes narrowing as the streaks of hyperspace danced across the viewport. "Now we plan. They'll be back, and when they come, we'll be ready." The battle wasn't over. Far from it. But as long as they were alive, they still had a fighting chance. And in the vastness of space, that was all they needed. The swirling blue and white streaks of hyperspace painted the cockpit in a cold, unsteady glow. The hum of the Phantom Star's engines was the only sound in the quiet that had settled over them after the frantic escape. It was a moment of rare peace, yet the tension lingered like an invisible thread between them, fragile and taut, ready to snap at the slightest disturbance. Ethan sat in the pilot's seat, his body still coiled with the remnants of adrenaline, his spiral, but his mind a million miles away. He kept his eyes fixed on the controls, running through systems checks that didn't really need his attention. It was easier than confronting the silence, easier than acknowledging the turmoil inside him, easier than facing her. Behind him, Lyra stood by the viewport, her gaze lost in the endless expanse of hyperspace. The bruises on her blue skin had started to fade, though the weight of captivity still hung heavy on her frame. She had spent so long in chains, so long treated as an object, that the idea of freedom seemed like a dream she was still afraid to wake up from. Ethan glanced at her from the corner of his eye, watching the way her fingers traced the edges of the console absent-mindedly. She looked so small against the vastness of space, so delicate in this quiet moment, but he had seen her strength. She had risked her life back on Neo Tokyo, thrown herself into a fight she wasn't ready for. There was more to her than met the eye. But trust was something neither of them had the luxury to give freely. Lyra broke the silence first. "You didn't have to save me," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You could have left me there, bought my freedom, and walked away." Ethan stiffened at her words, his fingers tightening on the controls. He didn't know how to answer her, didn't know if there even was an answer that would make sense. Why had he done it? Why had he, after years of trying to live in the shadows, thrown himself into a fight that wasn't his to begin with? "It wasn't right," he said, finally breaking the silence. His voice sounded gruff, like the words had been dragged from him. "No one deserves that." Lyra turned to face him, her luminous eyes catching the dim light of the cockpit. There was something vulnerable in the way she looked at him, as though she were searching for something, some confirmation of who he really was. "But you've seen it before, haven't you?" she pressed. "You've watched others suffer. You could have walked away then, too. What makes this different?" Ethan exhaled, the weight of her question settling over him like a cloak of old guilt. He didn't want to explain, didn't want to dig up the past. But the look in her eyes, the quiet pain, the curiosity, and something deeper, more fragile, compelled him to speak. "I have seen it," he admitted, his voice low and tired. "I've seen people sold, used, killed. I fought in the wars that fueled those markets, watched people get swallowed by a system that didn't care if they lived or died. But that's not what made me stop." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the mask he wore slipped, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the soldier. "It was my mother. They took her, just like they took you." Lyra's breath hitched. She had suspected there was something personal driving him, but hearing it out loud changed everything. Her gaze softened, understanding flickering through the walls she had built around herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered, taking a cautious step closer to him. She reached out, her fingers hesitating just before they brushed his arm, as if she were afraid that touching him would shatter the delicate moment. Ethan shook his head, the familiar ache of loss dull but ever present. "It was a long time ago. I couldn't save her, but I wasn't going to let them take you. Not again." Silence settled between them, heavier than before, but not uncomfortable. It was a silence of understanding, of unspoken wounds that ran deep, but didn't need to be picked at. They both carried scars, both had lost parts of themselves to the galaxy's indifference, but in this moment, there was a shared recognition of pain and resilience. "I've never had anyone fight for me before," Lyra said quietly, her voice softer now. She was closer to him, standing by his side, the light from the console casting her face in shadow. "I don't even know what it means to be free." Ethan's gaze lingered on her, his mind swirling with thoughts he hadn't allowed himself to confront. Freedom. He had fought for it all his life, for others, for himself. But in the end, it always seemed to come at a cost. And now, here they were, running from the same chains that had once bound them, together, yet still so far apart. "We're not free yet," he muttered, his voice gruff, though not unkind. "Not while they're still out there hunting us." Lyra nodded, her face hardening at the reminder of the danger that still loomed over them. "Then we fight. Together." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. Her words carried a resolve that he hadn't expected, a determination that echoed his own. For the first time, he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar in his chest. A trust, fragile and new, but real. "Together," he agreed, his voice steady now. In the void of space, where trust was as scarce as hope, they had found both in each other. And though the future was uncertain, the bond they had forged was something far more powerful than either of them had anticipated. For the first time in years, Ethan Core felt like he wasn't running alone. The cold, starless void stretched endlessly ahead, a quiet calm before the storm Ethan knew was coming. The phantom star drifted silently in the shadows of the asteroid belt, hidden from view, but the tension within its hull was anything but still. Ethan stood in the cockpit, his gaze fixed on the cluster of enemy ships that loomed in the distance. The space station, Zephyr's fortress, was a hulking behemoth of metal and stone, nestled deep within the maze of floating debris. This was it. The heart of the galactic slave network. The very place that had taken so many lives, shattered so many families, including his own. Behind him, Lyra moved quietly, checking her gear, her once fragile demeanor now hardened with a resolve born of their shared purpose. The soft glow of the controls bathed her in a cool light, accentuating the scars that had faded but not disappeared. She had come a long way since their first frantic escape from Neo-Tokyo, but Ethan could still see the flicker of fear behind her determined eyes. "We don't have to do this," Ethan said quietly, though his own heart disagreed. His hands tightened around the edge of the console as he glanced at her. "We could still turn back, find a place to hide. They wouldn't be able to find us, not out in the far reaches of the galaxy." Lyra shook her head, her expression resolute. "No more running, Ethan. If we don't stop them here, they'll never stop. Others will suffer like I did, like your mother did." Her voice softened at the mention of his past, but her determination never wavered. "I can't live with that, and I don't think you can either." She was right, and they both knew it. Ethan had tried to run before, tried to bury his past under layers of anonymity, but the galaxy had a way of pulling you back into the fight. And this fight, this mission, was one he couldn't ignore. The faces of the slaves, the countless lives destroyed by the cartel, haunted his every step. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about redemption. He nodded, his jaw tightening. "You're right." A flicker of movement on the screen drew their attention. More enemy ships were arriving, sleek and heavily armed, their formation tightening as they prepared for the battle they thought would never come. They were wrong. Ethan keyed in the comms. "Chen, you ready?" His voice crackled over the line to the small fleet of ships gathered nearby, hidden in the shadows of the asteroid field just like them. "Ready and waiting, Core," came the voice of Captain Mara Chen, his old comrade from the war. "You give the signal, and we'll be on them like a pack of rabid wolves." Ethan couldn't help the faint smile that tugged at his lips. Chen had always been the one to charge in first, consequences be damned. She and her team of former Defense Force pilots had answered Ethan's call without hesitation, and now they were here to settle the score alongside him. "Wait for my signal," Ethan replied, his tone hardening. "Let's give them hell." He cut the comms and glanced back at Lyra. She was strapping herself into the co-pilot seat, her fingers trembling only slightly as she activated the weapons systems. She caught his eye, and though her expression was fierce, he could see the shadow of doubt in her gaze. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice softer now, more personal. Lyra met his eyes, her jaw set. "I don't think I'll ever be ready for this," she admitted, "but I know what's at stake. I know what we're fighting for." Ethan nodded. That was enough. With a flick of his wrist, he powered up the engines. The Phantom Star came to life with a low hum, its systems primed for the battle ahead. The asteroid belt began to shift around them as the ship moved through the debris, weaving expertly between jagged rocks and ancient wreckage. Lyra kept her focus on the weapons console, her fingers brushing over the controls with newfound confidence. The enemy fleet loomed larger as they approached, unaware of the trap that had been set for them. Zephyr's forces had grown complacent, secure in their power and the belief that no one could challenge them. Ethan would make sure they paid for that arrogance. "Now," he muttered under his breath. With a sharp movement, he slammed the comms back on. "Chen, hit them now." The void exploded into chaos. Chen's fleet surged out from the asteroid field like a swarm of angry hornets, guns blazing as they descended upon the enemy ships. Plasma fire lit up the darkness, streaking across the vast emptiness of space in violent flashes of red and blue. The slavers' vessels scrambled to react, but the ambush had caught them off guard. The first volley of attacks tore through their formation, sending two ships spiraling into the void, their engines gutted by the surprise assault. Ethan pushed the throttle forward, sending the Phantom Star barreling toward the heart of the battle. His hands flew over the controls, dodging debris and weaving through the thick of the fight as plasma fire rained down around them. Every instinct, Every lesson from the war flooded back to him with deadly precision. "Target the lead cruiser," Ethan barked. "We take that out, we break their command structure." Lyra's fingers flew across the weapons console, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "Locked on," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Firing now." The ship's cannons roared to life, sending a barrage of energy blasts straight into the lead cruiser's hull. The ship shuddered under the impact, its shields flickering and failing under the relentless assault. Ethan watched as it began to list, smoke billowing from its side as it spiraled into the asteroid field. But the battle was far from over. More slaver ships were pouring in, reinforced by Zefar's elite guard. They were better armed, better trained, and they had numbers on their side. Ethan's fleet was small, a ragtag group of veterans and rebels, but they fought with the desperation of those who had nothing left to lose. The comms crackled with Chen's voice, breathless but determined. "We're holding them off, Core, but we can't keep this up forever. What's the play?" Ethan's jaw clenched as he watched the battlefield unfold before him. They needed to take out the space station, Zefar's base of operations. It was heavily fortified, its defenses designed to repel even the most daring of attacks, but if they could breach it, they could cripple the entire operation. His eyes met Lyra's. She nodded, understanding the unspoken plan. "We go for the station," Ethan said, his voice hard with resolve. "Chen, cover us, we're going in." The battle for freedom had truly begun, and Ethan Core had no intention of leaving until the galaxy's most ruthless slavers were broken beneath the weight of their own empire. Together, they would bring the whole damn thing down. The stars stretched endlessly in the void, cold and distant, indifferent to the battle unfolding beneath their eternal gaze. The phantom star weaved through the chaos, its hull rattling under the strain of relentless enemy fire. Ethan gripped the controls with grim determination, his eyes locked on the massive structure ahead, the slave trader's fortress. It loomed like a dark monolith, surrounded by the wreckage of fallen ships, its defenses bristling with cannons and shields. This was it. The heart of the galactic slave trade, the very place that had stolen so many lives, including his own family. And now it would be the stage for its destruction. "They're throwing everything at us," Lyra muttered from the co-pilot's seat, her voice tight with concentration as she targeted an incoming fighter. She fired, and the ship exploded in a brilliant burst of light, sending debris scattering across their path. Her hands moved with a precision she had earned in the heat of battle, the fear she once carried, now transformed into steel-eyed focus. "I know," Ethan replied, his voice low and steady. "But we're almost there. Hold on." Behind them, Chen and her fleet continued to engage the enemy ships, buying them time. But time was running out. The slavers were rallying, pouring more forces into the fight, and even Chen's battle-hardened crew couldn't hold them off forever. Ethan's gaze shifted to the fortress looming ever closer, its defenses lighting up the blackness of space. Plasma bolts streaked past them, each one a reminder of how close they were to failure, how fragile this mission was. Yet, for the first time in years, Ethan felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Hope. He glanced at Lyra. She had changed so much since the moment they'd met in that grimy alley in Neo-Tokyo. The broken, enslaved woman who had barely believed in her own freedom was gone, replaced by someone fierce, determined, and unshakable. Her eyes were locked on the battle ahead, but there was a fire in them now, a strength that burned brighter than any star. "They won't stop," she said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of what they both knew. "Even if we destroy the fortress, they'll rebuild. They always do." Ethan tightened his grip on the controls, his jaw clenched. "Not if we take out Zephyr. Without him, the network crumbles." Zephyr. The name burned in his mind like a brand. The monster who had built an empire on the suffering of others. The one who had taken his mother, sold her into the darkness, and left Ethan with nothing but rage and a thirst for vengeance. This was more than a battle to end slavery. This was personal. And today that reckoning would come. The station's shields flared as they drew closer, and alarms blared across the console. They were entering the heart of enemy territory now, where the defenses were strongest, where survival seemed impossible. "We're not going to make it," Lyra said, her voice tense but calm. Her eyes flickered toward Ethan, but there was no fear in them now, just acceptance. Ethan's lips curved into a tight, humorless smile. "We don't need to make it, we just need to get close enough." With a swift motion, he diverted all remaining power to the engines, pushing the ship into a headlong dive toward the fortress. The shields crackled as they absorbed another volley of fire, and the hull groaned under the pressure. Every system was straining, on the verge of collapse, but Ethan pressed on. There was no turning back. Now, he shouted, and Lyra fired a volley of missiles directly at the station's central command tower. The impact was immediate. The fortress shuddered violently, its shields flickering and dying as explosions ripped through its outer layers. Fire and debris billowed into space, and for a moment it looked like they had won. But then, through the smoke and wreckage, a single ship emerged, sleek, predatory, and unmistakably powerful. Zephyr's command ship. Ethan's heart clenched, his eyes narrowing as he watched the vessel streak toward them, faster than anything else in the battle. He had expected this. Zephyr wouldn't go down with the fortress. No, he would try to escape, to slip away and rebuild his empire elsewhere, leaving the wreckage of his defeat behind. But Ethan wasn't going to let that happen. Chen. Ethan barked into the comms. Take the fleet and focus on the station. We're going after Zephyr. Chen's voice crackled back, breathless but resolute. You got it, Core. Make sure that bastard doesn't get away. Ethan cut the comms and punched the engines, chasing Zephyr's ship into the debris field. The two vessels danced through the wreckage of battle, dodging flames and shards of broken ships as they weaved between the remains of the slave network's empire. But Zephyr was fast, and his ship was outfitted with the best the galaxy had to offer. I'm not losing him, Ethan muttered, pushing the ship to its limits. The Phantom Star lurched forward, closing the distance. Lyra's hands flew over the weapons console. I've got a shot, she said, her voice sharp with focus. But it's risky. Ethan's gaze flicked toward her, then back to Zephyr's ship. Take it. Lyra fired. A streak of plasma shot from the Phantom Star, hurtling toward Zephyr's ship. For a moment, it looked like it would miss. But then it hit, a glancing blow, but enough to send Zephyr's ship spiraling out of control. Ethan seized the opportunity. He maneuvered the Phantom Star alongside the crippled vessel, locking onto it with a tractor beam. The two ships shuddered as they collided, and Ethan leapt from his seat, grabbing his blaster. Stay here, he ordered Lyra. But she was already up, her eyes blazing. I'm coming with you. There was no time to argue. Together they boarded Zephyr's ship, cutting through the chaos and wreckage until they found him. The reptilian slaver, with his cold, calculating eyes, stood at the center of the command room, his scaled hands tightening around a blaster as he faced them. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Ethan's breath hitched, every memory of his mother, every sleepless night of rage and guilt, crashing over him like a wave. Zephyr sneered. You think this changes anything, Core? Kill me and 10 more will take my place. The galaxy will never be free. Ethan's grip on his blaster tightened, his hand trembling. He could end it all. Right here, right now. One shot, and Zephyr would be gone. But Lyra's voice cut through the fog of anger, steady and calm. Ethan, she whispered, stepping closer. Don't let him control you. This isn't just about you. It's about every life we save, every life we stop him from destroying. Her words anchored him. The weight of vengeance lifted, replaced by something deeper. Purpose. Hope. Ethan lowered his blaster. You're right. Zephyr's eyes widened, confusion flickering across his face as Ethan holstered his weapon. Instead, he pulled out a pair of energy cuffs and secured them around Zephyr's wrists. You're going to rot in a cell, Ethan said, his voice cold but calm, and you're going to watch everything you've built fall apart. As they dragged Zephyr back to the Phantom Star, the battle outside finally began to fade. The slaver's fortress was in ruins, and Chen's fleet had secured victory. The galaxy had taken its first step toward freedom. Ethan stood beside Lyra on the observation deck, watching the stars drift by. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. There was still work to be done, still battles to fight, but for now, they had won. What now? Lyra asked, her voice soft. Ethan glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Now, we keep fighting, but we're not alone anymore. Lyra smiled, and together they turned to face the vast expanse of space, ready to face whatever came next. Because together, they had forged something stronger than vengeance, something that could change the galaxy.